Welcome to Evening Hour with Kirsten Seymour. I'm Kirsten Seymour. Over recent weeks on the Evening Hour, we have gone on a journey from Swat Valley down to Peshawar to try to understand something about radicalism. Tonight, we're going to have a more quiet conversation with a man who is not associated with the Taliban nor the Pakistan military, but is an intellectual and a religious scholar. We'll be discussing this issue with Dr. Anees Ahmad. But before we do that, let's go back to an interview I had with him 2 years ago when I visited his home and we discussed the issue of the shallowness of the United States of America and, again, the catch-all word, radicalism.
Hollywood version of Khilafat don't exist in Islamic history. Ruler in Islamic context is neither a dictator nor a secular overseer of authority, but a person with deep ethical involvement and a person with the responsibility to make sure that justice, equity, fairness, honesty, security of life and honor of people exists. These are basics of Islamic political order. The whole concept of Khilafat is not rolling back the history, but it's a dynamic concept, which means in 20th century or 40th century you will have same relevance of these principles for humankind. Extremism and terror and violence are separate things. Those who take part of truth and claim it to be truth, in my view, are extremists, because they have not looked on the whole image. People who have taken parts and then try to enlarge on it have automatically moved into areas of extremism. Those who are extremists, in my view, have served well the purpose of defamation of Islam and not defending Islam. You cannot eliminate extremism with another form of extremism, which is use of bullet and power. The Hizb ut-Tahrir or any movements who have their own interpretation of Islam should have liberty to express their views, and we should be left with the people to decide about acceptance or rejection. Jihad has been unfortunately distorted and given a meaning which the Quran does not provide. Jihad literally means in the Quran extreme struggle to establish peace, law and order, justice and human rights. Now, do you find this concept of jihad when you read in Newsweek or Time or Foreign Affairs or so many of the journals, research papers written that jihad means go out and kill everyone? Well, same was the view of Hitler. He wanted to be savior of the world. Do we accept that? Who made America world policeman? And have they resolved their internal problems to resolve world issues? Have they resolved their own policies in the country? Now, if they cannot solve their own problems, who asked them to come to Iraq and Afghanistan to solve their problems? On what basis? It's simply a euphemism for neocolonialism, nothing less than that. This neocolonialist mind where you want to continue colonialism in a new name. The greed for natural resources brought people to Iraq, oil, and same perhaps is the concern to occupy other lands. And naturally people who are natives will never like those who are oppressors in their view, who are occupying their homeland. How can they love them? So simple. I think there is need to change psyche and to come out of this phobia of fear. It's a phobia. And they are not coming, they are increasing it all the time. Earlier it was Saddam, then it became Islamic bomb of Pakistan, not a Hindu bomb of India, never, nor a Jewish bomb of Israel, never, but Islamic bomb of Pakistan. Then Iran, and tomorrow will be something else. Now, I think they have to come out of this self-imposed psychosis. Killing can never solve. Did America solve the problem of Vietnam, of Korea, of Iraq, of Afghanistan? Think of any areas, even Nicaragua and South America. Did they solve problems by gun? You cannot solve problems by gun. You have to talk to people, win them by logic and reason, by love and humanity, by your concern for them, not treating them like enemies. They are human beings. Let's find out why they're acting like that. And I'm sure if we are sincere and we make proper efforts, then peace is not difficult to be achieved.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you for coming.
So in speaking about the de-radicalization program, I'd just like to ask a religious scholar how you respond to the concept of de-radicalizing an extremist member of Taliban, Al-Qaeda, given that they consider themselves to be the real Islam.
Well, you see, when we talk about radicalization itself, it depends how we define it. Also, when we talk about extremism, jihad, real Islam, all these terms need to be defined. It's just like we have Catholicism, Protestantism, Southern Baptist understanding of Christianity. Which one you call really real Christianity? Therefore, when we talk about real Islam, we should have to go back to the sources to find out what do we find there, the Quran and prophetic example. Unfortunately, going back to Quran and Sunnah has been termed by Orientalists as going backward, fundamentalism, or trying to be literalist. And all three, in my view, are incorrect. The Quran happens to be the book which calls for use of reason, use of logic, use of dialogue, use of all those means of communication which make humanity a better place to live. Unfortunately, some of the Quranic statements have been taken out of context and not studied in conjunction with other Quranic statements. Perhaps I should begin with a statement which you must have heard many times, and that is those who are oppressed and driven out of their homelands, they cry for help and pray to Allah, send someone to liberate us. This is in Surah Nisa. If this was said by Martin Luther King or by Bishop Tito, then nobody will say it's a fundamentalist call. But since the Quran says those who are oppressed, they need help, it has been put as if it's a call for terrorism, violence, extremism. If you read 22nd chapter of the Quran, it says that if it was not that Allah removes one people by the other through jihad, then temples, synagogues, churches and mosques where name of Allah is often taken would have been deserted, unquote. I want to find out one single statement in world scriptures where places of worship of other people are mentioned to be protected.
When you talk about people who are being oppressed, what about governments themselves that seem to be acting, even if they're considered an Islamic state like Pakistan? But what if that state, by some standards, are seen to be acting un-Islamic or against the principles of Islam? Then would you consider that to be an oppressive situation against Muslims.
Definitely, I think it's not just Muslims, but the minority government of apartheid in South Africa was definitely oppressive regime, because it did not allow black or other majority to grow, develop and play their role in society. Same applies to Muslim countries. I think Islam does not have discrimination in terms of global principles. If Muslims act unwisely, if they don't treat their own citizens with respect, they deserve same blame.
There's a statement in the Quran that says Muslims may not and cannot act aggressively against their own state. And that was up in all of the centers, the 3 centers of the de-radicalization program. And that statement was put up there. But I'd like to know if as a religious cleric, when you're dealing with other members of civil society in the medical field, like psychiatrists who are looking at people's mentalities, and there's actually a Cambridge program that's religious and psychology research group, and they're literally one group, and they're researching religion and psychology together. And obviously that's looking at religion being used to people, used against people with a lower intensity intellect, that they're actually targeting people like that for their own purposes and their own means. But looking at a pure religious perspective, do you have at all an inside conflict when you think about some of the extremist groups? I don't mean a sympathy, but an empathy for some of the guys that you see who say they are fighting for the real Islam. And obviously in the real Islam there are dictates that are according to Allah of how a political system is ruled. And they are contesting that Pakistan is not ruling according to Allah. And if you're taking those guys and then de-radicalizing them, how can you preserve Islamic concepts and de-radicalize somebody who is considered radical because of their Islamic concepts?
You have raised a dozen issues in one single statement.
There's a little bit of a contradiction in the middle of all of this.
I really appreciate
Where's the fine
that.
line coming
and
from
I'm glad
school?
you raised all those issues. When we talk about the Quran saying don't challenge authority, then it's only half the statement of the Quran. If they read the full statement, the statement says obey Allah, obey Prophet and those in authority. But if you dispute with them, then obey only Allah and the Prophet. This is the whole sentence of the Quran, which means that if rulers are behaving un-Islamically, not to be followed by the people. And that's the Quranic principle which is elaborated elsewhere in many words. Which means that people have a right to voice disagreement, have a right to change a regime, not necessarily by bullets and gun, but by the accepted norms of society, political process, opinion making, and so on and so forth.
When is there a time that using violence and force, when is that okay in Islam?
The fact of the matter is, there is no room for violence in Islamic framework, because jihad, which is one of the hot topics today, in the Quran is defined as a corrective methodology and not as a defensive or aggressive approach. Which means when you find injustice, violence, corruption, exploitation, and you cannot correct it by normal means, then force may be used, but not against people, against system. And that's the basic difference. If I use an example, if Prophet, peace be upon him, was tortured in Makkah by Makkans, and he had opportunity to take revenge from them, and he don't take any revenge, then that shows the ethos of faith. that you
So
don't have to retaliate.
seeking revenge against the death of Osama bin Laden is against Islam.
Against?
Osama bin Laden's death.
Yeah.
Seeking revenge of his death would be un-Islamic.
Well, you see, seeking revenge of a person from those who are innocent remains unethical, un-Islamic in any context. Not just bin Laden, but wherever it takes place is wrong. Islamic principles are very simple and direct.
How do you feel about Pakistan? Do you see yourself equally as a Muslim as you do as a Pakistan national citizen? Would you say you identify yourself equally in those two respects? Or would you see yourself more first as a Muslim, second as a Pakistan citizen?
Well, it's not only me, but the Pakistan's constitution says Pakistan is Muslim first and Pakistani later.
Okay.
And therefore, it's not only myself,
Okay.
but the very document on which we take oath declares that. Let me go back to what you were saying a bit earlier.
Please do. Thank you.
You see, when we talk about religion, psychology, rehabilitation of people, I think all these are done in a specific framework. If you are following conventional psychology as a clinician, or you are following Freudian, Jungian, or Skinnerian behaviorist psychology, or others, then based on our basic assumptions, you will analyze the phenomena and suggest remedy. Therefore, all psychological treatments for me are very much relative and very much confined. Nevertheless, religion, again, when we use it in the typical Eastern or Western meaning, refers to rituals and ceremonies, conventions, traditions of people. But Islam is very much different. It does not call itself religion, it calls itself deen. And deen means the way of life, the vision, the approach, which is optimistic, peaceful, balanced, and moderate. Therefore, Islam as faith cannot be called a religion, but a total vision and approach of life. When we want to rehabilitate some people with psychological methods, using the framework of Western psychological theories, then we may interpret a behavior in a different framework than what it should be. For me, if we really want to rehabilitate people and give them a new orientation, best way would be that they are exposed to the core of Quranic message, not by giving it a new meaning, but by exposing them to the heart of the Quran. Some people, and it's not unusual, some people think that perhaps mysticism is the essence of Islam. But as a student of comparative religion, I can say with all confidence that mysticism might be one aspect of a spiritual experience, but it is not the core of Islamic message.
What is the core then?
The core is how to create unity in life, how to have balance, how to have moderation. Therefore, the Prophet, as we believe in the Quran and Sunnah, tells us, had a journey into heaven, but he came back. A mystic never comes back. A mystic, once he reaches the apex.
I thought he was the only one who ever did come back. Because if you really met God, you would never come back. And that was the great sacrifice of the Prophet.
Because he was
saw God and came back.
not a mystic.
Okay.
This was the reason.
Okay.
If he was a mystic, he will never come back.
I met a lot of Taliban this week. I met a lot of the boys. I met some older men, and I met some young boys. And, you know, they were reasonably polite to me and had some very interesting conversations with them. Have you, in your experience, had extremists, people with very extreme mentalities, come and talk to you about the Quran? And did you ever deal with somebody you found very radical, in the sense that we're using that word radical? You yourself, in your experience, had to talk to somebody really radical, and maybe you even did some de-radicalization through religion, but not through psychology. Can you tell me about someone you may remember?
I'm basically educationist. And I believe the Islamic approach is educational and not to reinforce by any other theories. Secondly, as you said, I have come across throughout my career students who are sometimes very violent on campuses, sometimes very cooperative, understanding. And I have always talked to them, always tried to understand their problem, always try to share with them how I look on those issues differently. I think what causes extremism and violence is one's conviction that what one thinks is the ultimate solution. When we break ice, when we enter dialogue, when we make effort to look on other side of the coin, then we start understanding each other. We know problems, and when no problems, we can resolve them. So my approach all my life has been to have a dialogue with my students, to understand them. I have met people with extreme views in my life, in all parts of the world, not only Pakistan. I travel extensively. And I have found that if you address issues, then even a person who is apparently extremist will understand your position. Therefore, to change people is not a matter of putting them in a psychological straitjacket, but to listen to them and resolve the issues. If there is poverty, if there is lack of education, if there is social crisis, if there is an ongoing threat of external interference in your region, then all these factors are bound to create responses. Responses may be sometimes quite rational, sometimes otherwise. And therefore, instead of addressing an irrational attitude, issues have to be
I know you lived in America. How do you feel about Pakistan being slightly, in some eyes, again, being slightly complicit with the United States, or allowing the United States to break their sovereignty and humiliate Pakistan?
Well, I think a normal Pakistani and most of academicians in Pakistan are deeply hurt by the interference. They don't feel comfortable at all about it, and they believe that without US intervention we can resolve our issues, we can bring peace to country, and we can even have economic prosperity without any foreign aid.
Right.
But unfortunately, rulers in Pakistan and most of Muslim countries think otherwise, because they have been products of neocolonialism. Their minds are neocolonial minds. They believe that former colonial still is their God, and therefore they are not prepared to think otherwise. You talk with a young man in the street, on campus, anywhere, and you will find that they don't believe in their rulers at all. That's why you had the Arabian summer. That's why you had all those problems in those countries where for over 30 years they were called, like a country was called as the safe haven.
These revolutions.
Yes.
So when getting back to what you said about it's natural to react when somebody is intervening in your political matters and in your homeland as well, how would you, at what point, let's just look at Taliban and these boys that get radicalized and put into front line of against NATO troops just over the border and then back, now fighting your military here in Pakistan. It does look like people are being played against each other, and now Recently I heard the head of the PMLN, Nawaz Sharif, say now America was enemy number one, now Pakistan's enemy number one. And there's a shift that the Taliban are actually saying they're against Pakistan itself, and that wasn't the case before. They were brothers in arms a long time ago. So give me an example. This doesn't mean that you're for Taliban by no means, but is there any area when you say flip the coin, try to understand the other side? Where can we understand the Taliban? Where can we understand where they're coming from? And is there some space in Islam that they could declare justifiably jihad against the state of Pakistan at this point in the day?
Well, you see, the whole issue of Taliban is not that simple as we sometimes think. Their origin itself is very much complex, and with all fairness, no one can say they came into existence without American support. Now, those who supported and created them as a problem should also think how to work it out in a better way. And the better way for me is only through dialogue. Secondly, I believe Taliban is not a problem inside Pakistan. It's an external problem of Afghanistan. That's where they had their mainstay, and that's where they are even presently playing their role. And Pakistan should not permit that kind of radical approach imported in our country. Thirdly, I believe that all these radical groups, they need to be treated with a very sophisticated intellectual approach, not a brutal approach of force. Force for me can never solve problems.
Very respectfully, sir, if I may, just stepping back a little bit in the conversation. When I talked to the Taliban, I was really trying to get into their, not just their minds, but also their hearts, because we talked a long time, years back when I first met you, we talked about you can't change a man's heart.
Yes.
You can change a mind, but you cannot change somebody's heart. And so I'm trying to understand, can we really de-radicalize somebody? Their heart can stay with Islam. I'm sure that that's the case. But the anger. And there's still more things going on that's causing this anger. So before we can go into the negotiation, which you're talking about, which is a vitally important step forward, before we can do that, firstly, we need to kind of try to understand what is it in the Taliban that you could justify why they would be declaring a jihad against the state of Pakistan. Why are they doing that now? And is there somewhere that can be justified, not that they're right, but justified in their eyes, so that we can understand them?
You see, first I believe that it's not only mind, even heart can be changed. And change of heart is not difficult at all. It's all a matter of how softly, how systematically we approach both mind and heart. And I have in my own experience examples where both have changed with the people. Now, the issue of Taliban is complex, but perhaps if I simplify it, their jihad is not against Pakistan as such, but their jihad is against those who support America. And therefore, by inference, they come up and say that since Pakistan is allying itself with America, therefore jihad against Pakistan may be permissible. Now we must understand this psyche. The psyche is very simple. It's not against Pakistan. It's essentially against America. But since Pakistani forces are interpreted by them that they are playing the role of front line of American policies, therefore they think whoever supports Taghut or oppressor is also an oppressor. Now that image needs to be changed, and that's why I'm saying again and again, there is need to have a dialogue so they understand, and in that particularly religious scholars have a role to play. They need
So should that dialogue be between American leaders and Taliban in that case, or should it be between the Pakistani leaders and the Taliban?
Well, Americans by trial and error are coming back on this track themselves, and they are saying that we would like to have dialogue directly with Taliban, irrespective of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Nevertheless,
But they're saying they want to do that with the strategy of first exhausting the Taliban, thereby creating a lot of problems for Pakistan because they're pushing a lot of operations. And
this is my own point, that when they increase operations, they cause us problem, they create more terror, and ultimately they suffer. You know, this policy of terror or use of force could not suppress the Irish radicals for 600 years. How could you suppress a people who have a tradition of fighting when they open their eyes? The whole region, if you know their culture, is not based on peace, although Islam is peace. But in that part of the world which I am talking about, use of gun is like a toy from childhood. In that kind of culture, if you use force and pressure, you can never resolve issues. British had to come to table to discuss after 600 years. America will do the same. Therefore, I don't believe rhetorics are different. But if you want to solve the problem, then it has to be by dialogue, no other way.
what happens when America goes home this time, like they did last time? What happens when they go home? Is there any possibility, and some people say it looks like it, I think it looks like it too, that America is possibly trying to create, not a civil war, but hand the war on terror over to Pakistan and go home. And what better way of getting rid of the war on terror for the United States than to just make everybody get mad at their own country, and then America starts to recede into the distance and then literally goes off into the distance. Then what are you going to do in this country to maintain peace and not break out into a total civil war? If Taliban are being played against the Pakistan military and the fighting continues, then what's the solution?
Well, we have to solve problem ourselves. We cannot ask America to solve the problem because America is the problem for us. And as you said very correctly, they want to leave their heritage of warfare and civil war while they go back to their country. Now, when we inherit that situation, I think we shall have to again build confidence with our people. We shall have to educate them. We shall have to give them their dignity and respect.
Dignity and respect, I think, are things that I think that Western countries have lost in their foreign policy writing. I think terrorism has succeeded in making people fearful. Therefore, their policies are based on fear. The greatest fear is Iran.
Yes.
Pakistan's greatest fear is India. So that's always in the background of all the policies. But in a religious perspective, and looking at foreign policy, you have the Sharia law, the Constitution that's based on God's law, and that's not indifferent from the American Constitution, which is based on the Christian law, which is based on biblical commandments.
Yes.
So nobody is living in a world that isn't, especially Western Europe, that isn't based on God's law.
Sure.
I don't know why there's so much fear around having a Sharia law, or if that's incompatible to a democratic system. And from looking at Sharia law, it is hard for me to tell, is it compatible with a democracy? And do you think a democratic system is going to work in Afghanistan?
It is fully compatible, and I believe, as you said a while ago, Sharia law is most humane and human, man-friendly, which provides respect and dignity to Muslims and non-Muslims together. And therefore, Sharia law is the solution, but the Hollywood version of it, whips, stoning, killing, is unrealistic, and that has to be removed with very concerted efforts on the part of media. I think media has great responsibility in distorting image of Islam and projecting Islamic Sharia as a rule of terror and violence.
I think Islam gets very mixed in with just humanity, with human things. I mean, I was looking at Fox News earlier today, and there's a woman who killed her daughter and dismembered her, and that happened in the United States of America.
Yeah.
Lots of atrocities happen all over the world.
Yeah.
We have a lot more rape
Yes,
in the United States
yes,
than we have in this country. But if any atrocity happens in a Muslim country,
Unfortunately,
it's
yes.
a Muslim issue. It's
Yes,
not a people issue or a civil society issue. It's immediately
No
attributed
doubt,
to Islam.
no doubt.
How did Islam get so mixed up in these things? And why is it just because you are more religious that you assume if somebody
No.
does something, then they're acting against their religion?
I think it's a colonization through media, and therefore tools have changed. It's no more guns, but it's now camera, which projects, tarnishes images, distorts image of people, and shows them as if they are primitives, they are less than human beings. And therefore, I said a while ago that it's great responsibility of media to ensure that proper Islamic image is presented, which is not of violence, not of terrorism, not of oppression, but of peace, dignity and honor for all human beings.
I think with the United States of America and some of the Western countries in dealing with their foreign policies, I think with drone strikes, collateral damage, somewhere we find ways of couching these illegalities, which they are illegalities internationally. We find ways of justifying them for a greater good. And
Well,
do you think,
I doubt
would you say
very
that
much.
every...
I doubt. They cannot justify. You see, a spade must be called a spade. Whether it's done by individual or state, it's terrorism, it's interference, violation of human rights. Therefore, drone attacks cannot be condoned in the name of hitting some terrorists. Most of the people who were hit were civilians, not terrorists. This is the data that tells us.
And just one last religious question. The dichotomy of power versus love. We're supposed to have an international community based on love of all humanity, equality among all humans. Collateral damage is not equality. It's not equality of life, obviously. But that's in the name of power. And so how would you, from a religious perspective, in looking at foreign policies that are being written in the world that we're living in today, where everybody's looking at state sovereignty, yet we have an international community now. And the overall, overarching theme of Islam, you said, is unity. Do you think Islam or Muslim countries are going to actually step into leadership roles in the global community in the upcoming years? Do you think that influence will have a greater service in that regard?
I think Muslim people have already moved in that direction. The global awakening and
In the
revolution in Arab world,
Springs, yes.
which were the centers of westernization at one point. All those countries, youth have woken up, and now they are coming up to lead Muslim world to a better future. A future where they would like to see more respect, recognition and dignity for the people, not to be treated like slaves by their own colonized rulers or by those who want to exploit the resources in the name of their national security and their own interests.
What about the fight for freedom? Westerners are always saying that this is a fight for freedom. Islam is oppressing our freedoms. How do you respond to that
You
kind
see,
of
the recent
mentality?
awakening indicates it's not a matter of Western thought, but all those changes which took place in the Middle East recently are rooted in Islamic thinking, which means Islam wants people to stand up against oppression and establish a peaceful democratic structure. And that's what Islam is.
You think Pakistan citizens are free?
Citizens have always been free, because I feel that people in Pakistan can speak up their ideas. But unfortunately, there is a state control on media. I don't see that free criticism which I would like to see in my country. At the same time, I think there is lack of concern about country's ideology. There is more trend towards westernization, because people think the more we westernize, the more we are developed, and that's not correct. I believe that Pakistan's ideology should be the base for our national security, for our policies.
You just caught me in one, because I think that. If I think Western, I think more developed. I guess China's getting pretty developed these days. You do think that. That is a natural bias that you trend towards thinking.
Yeah, I look on trends, and I believe that it's not the same to call development and westernization two separate things. We can have development without westernization, although some Western writers believe that it's only through westernization you can have development. I don't agree with them.
So let's just close with one last question, dealing with de-radicalization. But looking at de-radicalization, what would be one concern that you would have when you hear about somebody de-radicalizing a strong, fundamental Islamic boy? What would you hope they don't do? What would you hope they don't get wrong? What would be the one thing that you would be concerned about?
Well, the one thing which I will say is not to play with the life of human beings, respect them, and create that balance and moderation which Islam wants in life of everyone. The Quran is a message of moderation and peace and not of violence, although it declares jihad as a most noble work to be done for removing evil, injustice from society.
So if they are doing the de-radicalization, is there anything that concerns you from an Islamic perspective that they could do that would be harmful?
I think they should not make them lambs, but make them real human beings. Not to be submissive, but to be proud. And proud in order to create peace in society and not to create violence.
And thank you very much for this interview.